So hey guys, how you doing? I hope you had a great Wednesday so far, and yeah, you know. So we have a talking head video tonight, and I'm kind of be talking about my interest in a device. So I've been getting into more retro gaming in the last 6 to 7 years, and a lot of it stems from I just tend to have more nostalgic feelings about that generation. I think that's normal. Like NES, SNES is what I grew up with, so I definitely have very nostalgic feelings about that. And when Nintendo released the minis, which I have the minis right here, of course, these were a great way to get back into these games because they were cheap, very inexpensive. Probably not up to Nintendo, but there was hacker tools out for these things, and you could actually add the games that you felt were deficient in the library. Some people just went nuts and added everything they could in there. But the other big thing is when it comes to these old consoles and HD TVs, they don't output or look that great. You got to use different things like component video cables into retro tanks, or mod your console into RGB out to a FrameMeister or open source scan converter, and it's just a pain. Like, people really love these games, and I feel like the people that are most crazy about doing that are going to be people that this is their primary thing that they're still gaming on. They're not gaming on like a PS4. They might buy like a game for a PS4, but this is what they really care about, and I have respect for that. But these were a great cheap alternative to get HDMI out and at least get these in like HD to your TV and looking pretty good. But anytime anybody has done like an RGB mod to a scan converter to RetroPie through emulation or something like that, I feel like some stuff's been missing. And so I've been looking for something that's like an all-in-one unit that can address a lot of my concerns and bring back some things that I'm missing. For instance, one of my favorite things about retro games is light gun games, and there's really not a whole lot of solutions for that. Some people are coming out with like cheap solutions, but for like instance, like Hyperkin has like a light gun that's coming out, but it only works in Duck Hunt, and I kind of want to play more than Duck Hunt. All right, so let's talk about this. This is the Polymega, and the guys that had first started developing this and decided to do this broke off from Insomniac Games. So they worked on stuff like Spyro and whatever else Insomniac did in the last couple of years. So they broke off and decided they have a love for retro games and they wanted to do something really cool. The problem is we're in the midst of all these like scam consoles like the VGS and the Atari box thing, whatever that is supposed to be. I still don't believe that's a thing. And so I'm somebody that when I'm interested in a game and I keep my ear pretty low to the ground when it comes to the games industry, just because I find it interesting. Like, I'm one of those people that will sit there and watch all the developers and stuff that nobody knows do interviews at E3 every year on Giant Bomb, because I have a generalized interest in just the overall game industry. And typically most of the time that helps me out, because I'll end up seeing like, oh, this guy that worked on this game that I know of is working on this game. Like, I think a lot of people know who Miyamoto is or something like that, but you may not know who like Dylan Cuthbert is or something like that. And so if I see somebody of a name that I recognize, and they're working on a project, I typically get a good idea of like the quality of that project based on their past works. And so these two guys I was aware of, and kind of gave them more leeway than a lot of these other retro style consoles coming down the pipe. So why am I so interested in the Polymega over anything else? Like, I think what Analog is doing with their consoles, I think what Retro USB is doing with their console is really cool. I do think that if you want really good accuracy, that something like a field programmable gate array is the way to go. 100%. But the problem with field programmable gate arrays is, unless they're making a console that has multiple cartridge slots and a field programmable gate array powerful enough to handle all these things, and I'm not saying that couldn't happen at some point. I think a lot of people thought that this was going to be, because they did say at the beginning they were going to be using some FPGA chips But I think people got a little bit lost because it sounds like they were using them for some of the trouble chips and emulation and emulating the rest. So that was supposed to be their hybrid emulation thing, I guess. When they ditched that, they started looking into it. And one of the problems with emulation is done by enthusiasts. And I'm not saying that's a problem. What I'm saying is it's typically done by people in their spare time. So for instance, like I come home from work, like today I modded Awesome Hardware. Now, so it's actually Tuesday night for me. I modded Awesome Hardware. I went out and watered the flowers and stuff like I'm supposed to. And I came back in. I finally had time to sit down and make a video. This is a hobbyist thing, but I can't do it as well as somebody that's doing it as a career because I just don't have the time. And that's the way emulation development's been going for a long time, as a lot of these people have 9-to-5 jobs. They come home and they do it for a couple hours as a hobby. But now Polymega is taking this exorbitant price, which is $299 just for the base unit, without any of these modules that you change out for the cartridge slots and the controller ports and all this. And they're paying people to actually work on emulation software. And I think this is game changing, because there's a real big difference between when you're doing it for free on your own time and when you're getting paid for it. We all know that. There's a big difference between that. And so they have a guy working on their Sega Genesis emulation. They have a guy working on NES emulation. They have a guy working on Sega Saturn emulation, which is apparently really, really damn good. And there's going to be updates and stuff like that coming out for this console as time goes. But one of the things I find really hard about retro game collecting is I'm not an encyclopedia of retro game collecting. I don't know everything about retro game collecting. I wish I did. It'd be cool, but it's one of those things. I'm pulled in multiple different directions. I don't have the time to learn absolutely everything about the retro scene and whatnot. And so you'll have like weird games, like I've just heard recently this year, like the SNES version of True Lies is actually supposed to be a really freaking good game, and people kind of slept on it. And so that's something I'd be interested in playing in on a retro console like this, or something like an analog console. My problem with stuff like the analog consoles it is a console, and it's very much like an NES. You turn it on, you put your game in, there's some extra options there for HD and stuff, but that's it. The Polymega has a built-in database, and so if I put in a game that I'm unaware of and it has sequels or something like that, the database is going to pull up, hey, this game has sequels, and here's like the basic like user ratings for these games, because they're supposed to have user ratings eventually, and this is what people think, and there's like a synopsis and there's screenshots and all this nice stuff, and I really like that. The biggest thing for me on the Polymega is light gun games. I love light gun games, and they have a light gun coming out. They haven't said what the price is. It's based off of a light gun that was already being developed and apparently had a $100 price point. So I'm kind of curious how much that's going to cost. But when you have stuff like Sega Saturn emulation in there, and you can play Virtual Cop, and Time Crisis, and Lethal Enforcers, and God, what else? T2, and all that stuff on the same console, that's freaking awesome. I love that. I love that they finally have a light gun that works on an HD TV. I've seen some of what they had to do. Unfortunately, it seems like the little flash that you would get typically on a normal light gun lasts a tad bit longer on an HD TV, but it works, and it works really good from what I've seen so far. So as good as stuff like the analog is, as good as stuff is like using real hardware with a scan converter, that was the biggest thing for me right there. And then they're doing like nice little things, like it's based off of Linux on an x86 hardware. Like ARM CPU is fine, but typically when you start getting into like more powerful systems like Saturn, maybe even possibly PS2 in the future, it's going to be really hard to pull off on anything less than x86. And I've started getting into this whole thing where I've really looked hard at a lot of emulation lately, like a lot of really good well-baked emulation, and put up against FPGAs, and I can really barely notice much difference. Like the sound may be a little bit harsher here or there, but I could just change the equalizer or something on a TV and pan that out, or on my headphones or something like that. It's not really a deal breaker for me. If the game just straight up doesn't run, or runs like crap, that's a deal breaker for me. But for what I've seen so far, I'm really impressed with the emulation they're doing. And the fact that they have people actually doing this as their job, developing this stuff, is really freaking cool. And I hate to say it, I think they got me sold. Now, I did think a little bit about possibly going over to like an analog, but the thing that sells me on this, and it does have modules, so there's some clutter, stuff like that. But the thing that sells me on this is the fact that they have one device sitting there. All right, so lastly, the thing I think is really cool is it does have 32 gigs of soldered ECC memory on board. It will have an SD card slot, so if you just want to go as simple as put an SD card in it and expand the storage, you can do that. And the reason you need to have storage is this is not only a cartridge-based system or a CD-based system. I have a lot of discs that have gone to bit rot in the last couple of years, and I've tried getting them finished, redone on really expensive machines, and nothing. They're done. You can't get anything off of them. So when I look at a device like this, the thing that I really like is I can stick my discs in, I can rip them, I can stick them on an SD card. There's even an M.2 slot, which if you don't know is like a really fancy solid state drive that PCs typically have. You can get like a 1-2 terabyte SSD storage, throw it in this thing, and just load it full of like CD-based games. So I'm really excited for that because I have a lot of CD-based games that I would really love to have in like on board on a format like that. And if something happens to the CD, I still technically have the game. Now they have said that they want to do a online store at some point and possibly even sell some of these games, so you're not just you don't have to go out and get the disc. But I think this is awesome because I love to go to retro game stores. And I love to find a physical version. I'm kind of like one of those weird people where I want to have the physical version, but I also like the convenience of just sitting on my chair and just being able to go through games on a UI. And even on the current gen consoles like the Switch and stuff, it's sometimes a little annoying when I'm already like sat down and settled for the night and I'm playing some video games and I need to get up and go, flop another cartridge in. It's a really dumb thing, but there's that lazy factor that's really nice about digital. And the thing I love about this is the only thing I can think of that's kind of giving you the best of both worlds. There's ways around it, but the fact that this is actually a feature built into it, that's cool. And then the other thing that they said is that they will be looking at possibly putting indie games on there that are like low power, don't require much, so think like Shovel Knight or something like that. But to give like indie developers another outlet to sell their games. So this would be like not just completely tiered towards retro. This could like be like retro inspired games being sold through the store. So do I think the initial price is expensive? Yes. Do I think the modules are expensive? Not so much. Seeing that the modules are at least coming with 5 games, whether good or bad, there's some value to be there. The system seems to be built really well. I've seen the actual controllers that are wired to the system. They're actually like braided, like fancy mice and stuff. It's kind of crazy. So they're putting some quality into this thing. However, I'm not completely insane and I'm not going to pre-order this thing. I'm going to wait for this to hit YouTube, and if it takes a while to get a hold of the system, it takes a while to get a hold of the system. But I am excited for the Polymega. You guys let me know what you think. Are you just strictly like, no man, FPGA all the way? Are you like, I can play light gun games on this? That's awesome. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think down in the comments. I hope you had an awesome day, and I'll see you guys on Saturday. Later.